Hey everyone, Jack here. So let's get into this lecture on how to set up the collapse. This will be a three-part series, which will essentially give you most of what you need to know about how to collapse effectively in PF. So first of all, what is the goal of collapsing? I think there's a few relevant things to keep in mind in this vein of collapsing. So the first thing is that you really want to be making the judge's decision easier. Collapsing is condensing, right? And it's prioritizing on a basic level. You can't wind up by the end of the round with a bunch of random pieces of offense floating around where, the judge, it's not obvious to them what is and what isn't important. The key thing here is that, the round starts and let's say each team has three contentions. If the round ends with six contentions and everyone is just explaining why they win the issue of FDI and they win the issue of conflict and all of these different things, the judge doesn't know what to do. And so then the judge needs to intervene and needs to decide themselves what is important. And the moment that the judge needs to intervene and decide themselves what is important, that is when the round becomes totally unpredictable and it becomes hard for you to consistently win. So that's why you need to collapse to actually be able to win. And the other competitive advantage that collapsing gives for you is a time advantage, right? So if you have a three contention case and someone responds to all of it with 4 minutes of refutation in the rebuttal, if you can kick out of, say, two of the three contentions, the benefit for you is that you only have to spend, like a minute or so frontlining, a minute, 30 seconds or something of responses. So it becomes smart time wise so that you're not just spending the vast majority of your time just trying to dig out from under a bunch of responses. Okay, so how do you actually set up the collapse? Step one is to have good options in the first place. This is a really important, and I think it's something that isn't even as understood as it should be, given how obvious it is. You need to be able to go for any of your contentions in your case just as much as you could go for any one of your other contentions in your case. This is huge. I talk to teams all the time, like good teams that go into tournaments and they're like, "Oh yeah, we before every round know that we're going to go for our third contention, or before every round we know that we're going to go for our first contention." That's a huge problem, and it means that you can't collapse effectively, because what if the round happens and they cover that contention really well and they make a response that you don't know how to frontline? So to collapse effectively, you need to actually be able to use your options. The other thing that you can do is to increase the potential options that you can collapse on is you can read advantages/disadvantages in the rebuttal with strong impacts that are good enough so that you could potentially kick out of your case. If not kick out of your case, then at least extend the arguments in rebuttal in addition to maybe double collapse. You'd want to weigh those and contextualize those as well, such as to not make the round a complete mess. So, next thing, creating options in the constructive. How do you actually do this? So you want to create a diversified case, and you want to have multiple links and impacts that are interchangeable. So I think a good structure of a contention, for example, obviously there's 1,000 ways to skin this cat, right? Like this is not the one way to do it, but just to illustrate a good impact here, let's say you have two links and two impacts in a contention. If they're interchangeable, that's really nice because that means that either one of your one links could link into either one of your two impacts. If you have two links and two impacts and one link links into one impact and the other link links into the other impact, then you functionally have half as many options, right? Your hands are tied in terms of how you go for these arguments in the round. So interchangeability is a good way to maximize your leeway in the construction. And of course, you want to diversify your links and impacts and have multiple of them. And you want to have, essentially not just one argument that doesn't have nuanced, separate warranting. And the reason for this is that that's super easy to answer. If you have one link and one impact in your entire case, and the entire rebuttal only has to answer one link and one impact. And of course, if you're doing a lay case, something like that, narrative-wise, can be really great and super persuasive. But in terms of collapsing well, flow-wise, you certainly want to have a diversified case. Additionally, you want to have diversified impact scenarios. you don't want your case to be easily groupable. So let's say that your first contention's impact scenario is about the economy. Your second impact scenario, the impact scenario on the second contention maybe shouldn't also be about the economy, because then the team could group your two contentions and say, hey, we outweigh the economy generally for XYZ reason, which would be bad for you. There are some exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you will have a sole contention economy case, and if you're really well prepped on like why the economy is a prerequisite to everything and anything, then that can be a fantastic thing. So yeah, keep that in mind. All right. So if you want a narrative case, you actually want to collapse a little bit earlier. In the first rebuttal, you can actually start to weigh your case a lot harder, because there is basically the entire case has a common theme, and you don't need to worry about wasting your time weighing positions that you think that you're going to wind up kicking out of. So that does change the game a little bit. All right, so now let's talk about how to create options in the rebuttal. We talked a little bit about the fact that you should be reading disadvantages, advantages, and the like with impacts, etc., to create options in the rebuttal, but there's more that we can get into here. So um, besides generating independent offense with DAs and advantages, you can also straight turn a contention to give yourself an option. So straight turning a contention means that the only responses that you're giving to that contention are turns, right? So if somebody's reading the contention about how they increase foreign direct investment, and all of my responses were, okay, fine, you increase foreign direct investment, but foreign direct investment is actually a bad thing, that would be impact turning an argument. And as long as I'm not reading defense that they could then concede to kick out of those turns, that would be straight turning the contention. I'll probably make a video at some point going in depth on how to execute that strategy properly. But that's one great way for you to create options in the rebuttal. In addition, assuming that you're doing the second rebuttal and you actually have to frontline, I would say that you want to frontline at least one case position, right? So getting yourself one link and one impact, so you have something from your case that is available in the summary. At least one link and one impact, I would say, is what you should frontline. There are some cases in which it doesn't make sense for you to frontline case and you should kick out of case. I think those are relatively rare, though. Most of the time it makes sense to try and go for your case, because the 4 minutes of just pure offense that you're investing in the constructive should be capitalized on, generally speaking. But yeah, you want to frontline at least one case position so that you have a few different things that you could go for coming out of that second rebuttal. So now step 2 is to take away their options, right? So we sort of talked a lot about how to give yourself options for what to collapse on later in the debate, but how do you take away their options and make sure that you have all of the leeway and all of the wiggle room and they do not? A couple of things here. A, good coverage is absolutely key. This is one of the most important things to do a good rebuttal. You need to cover every important issue in the round, right? This doesn't mean bickering with every single one of their cards or statistics or examples or whatever it might be, but you do not want to let a path to the ballot go. Don't be the team that undercovers the contention 3 or undercovers whatever is at the bottom of their case. This is a really easy thing for rebuttalists to do, because the natural inclination in debate is to overcover whatever you cover first. And it's just kind of hard, because you're looking at, maybe if you're not looking that closely at your timer, you're just making the arguments and you're not really acting on the time pressure. But when you get to the C3 with 30 seconds left, then you're going to suddenly act on the time pressure and you're going to underwarrant, the 2 responses you can actually make. So think in advance, be constantly looking at your timer, make sure that you're covering everything in a timely fashion. One thing I would recommend is have responses on your flow slash in your speech doc that you know that it's okay for you to just extemporaneously skip, right? Not every piece of defense you need to read or you're in danger of losing the round. There are probably a couple of fantastic responses or turns that you do need to read. Certainly not the case for all of your responses. So keep that in mind. Next thing is that the better the argument, the more you should cover it. You should lean into clash on their best positions, because the better their argument is, the bigger of a threat it poses to you. And so the natural response when something poses a big threat to you in a debate is to cover it extra so that it poses less and less of a threat to you, so that you can increase the resistance to that good argument and make it harder for them to go for it. Another critical tip here is to respond to early weighing. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is a super easy mistake to make. I see teams all the time let weighing that happens early in the round just simply go unresponded to because for some reason they don't see it as its own independent argument. This might look like weighing on your case that someone reads, or it might look like weighing on a turn that someone makes. If you have a great response to the turn, then you don't necessarily need to additionally respond to the weighing. I would strongly encourage you to do so, though, unless you're on a serious time constraint. Because if you just concede that weighing in the next speech, you create a reason to prefer either their case or their offense to your case, which is certainly not a good thing you want to do, because a smart team in the very next speech will be like, hey, they've conceded that if our argument is true, you should always prefer it to their case, which means all we have to do is win this argument and then we beat back their case. So then they'll just try to win the argument. And now you're in a pretty bad spot. So don't let weighing go unresponded to. I see teams do this all the time. Again, this creates a potential path to the ballot for your opponent, right? Because whenever you concede weighing, you concede that here is something that like fundamentally matters in the round and can actually win them the entire debate. So you don't want to do that. Do not let weighing in the round that is early or late or whatever go totally unresponded to. It's a bad idea. All right. So in conclusion, first and foremost, you must have options before you can collapse, right? You can be the best second half team in the world, and if your front half debating is bad and it's not generating you strong quality options that you can go for that are well warranted, that have good evidence, that are diversified, that have quantified and explained impact scenarios, then you'll have a much tougher time because you're not working with the right tools. And then next of all, the goal should be to turn arguments into paths to the ballot. And you do that with collapsing and you do that with weighing, right? So in the round, you'll make, 20 different arguments, and maybe 2 or 3 of those you'll try to turn into actual paths to the ballot because you'll sit on them and you'll really explain them a lot. So yeah, hopefully this all made sense. Thank you for watching.